So again, the conspiracy theorists have been proven right again. Again, when someone calls something a conspiracy, these days it should just be called a spoiler alert. Because WHO pandemic, there's a treaty, an international treaty. What is it and why it matters and how can we stop it? Okay, what it is the World Health Organization has started drafting a global pandemic treaty on pandemic preparedness that would grant it absolute power over global biosecurity, such as the power to implement digital identities, vaccine passports, mandatory vaccinations, travel restrictions, standardized medical care, and more. And then they can shut your bank account down as soon as you do something that the government doesn't like protesting. COVID-19, while potentially deadly to certain vulnerable groups, simply isn't a valid justification for handing over more power to the WHO, especially in light of its many inexplicable mistakes in this and previous pandemics. As just one example, the WHO didn't publicly admit SARS-CoV-2 was airborne until the end of December 2021. Yet scientists knew the virus was airborne within weeks of the pandemic being declared. The WHO also ignored early advice about airborne transmission. So it seems clear that the effort to now hand over even more power to the WHO is about something other than them being the most qualified to make health decisions that benefit and protect everyone. With the treaty in place, all member nations will be subject to the WHO dictates. If the WHO says every person on the planet needs to have a vaccine passport and a digital identity to ensure vaccination compliance, then that is what every country will be forced to implement, even if the people have rejected such plans using local democratic processes. So you're giving up your sovereignty right now to the WHO. This is that crazy stuff that you used to think maniacs and conspiracy theorists were always worried about, a one world order. Well, and giving up our sovereignty. This is it. This is giving up our sovereignty. Under the guise of a global pandemic, the WHO, the World Economic Forum, and all its installed leaders in government and private business were able to roll out a plan that had already been decades in the making. The pandemic was a perfect cover. The whole premise behind this pandemic treaty is that shared threat requires shared response. But a given threat is almost never equally shared across regions. The WHO insists, look at the threat from COVID to Africa compared to the threat of COVID to the United States. We didn't have the same threat, right? Because there's not a lot of 80-year-old obese people in Africa, turns out. Not a lot of people with type 2 diabetes in Africa. The WHO insists that the remedy is the same for everyone, everywhere. Yet the risks vary widely from nation to nation, region to region, and person to person. They intend to eliminate individualized medicine and provide blanket rulings for how a given threat is to be addressed. Without a doubt, this can only result in needless suffering, not to mention the loss of individual freedom. Another clue about what the WHO intends to do with more power comes from its primary funder, Bill Gates. Did you know Bill Gates is the primary funder of the WHO?
Is he a doctor?
Is he a doctor? He's a college dropout. Gates recently, and he's walking around like he's Dr. Jonas Salk. He's a monopolist who stole every good idea he ever had. And he never finished college, but he's going to tell you how to run the World Health Organization and vaccine programs and how to deal with deadly viruses. And this guy never took one fucking health class in his life. Gates recently announced he's building a pandemic response team for the WHO because he is a fucking billionaire maniac who is a power-hungry oligarch, which he would like to be called the Global Epidemic Response and Mobilization, or GERM team. Very adorable. This team will be made up of thousands of disease experts under the WHO's purview. and will monitor nations and decide when they need to suspend civil liberties, force populations to wear masks, and close borders, the counter-signal reports. Of course, Gates is also the largest funder of the WHO when you combine the donations from both his foundation and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. This and other relationships speak volumes about the corruption still ruling the WHO. So the FDA super corrupt, CDC super corrupt, and the WHO super corrupt. But we should listen to them when it comes to everything. And if I don't, YouTube will take my channel down. That's corruption. That's you being ruled by evil, corrupt motherfuckers and them controlling the media. At the end of the day, Gates is basically paying the WHO to dictate to the world what they must do to make Gates a ton of money. As Canadian Conservative MP Leslie Lewis explains, the treaty includes 190 countries and would be legally binding. The treaty defines and classifies what is considered a pandemic, and this could consist of broad classifications, including an increase in cancers, heart conditions, strokes. If a pandemic is declared, the WHO takes over the global health management of the pandemic. That's that. And they get to decide if it is one. Of even more concern is the treaty is enshrined the WHO would be in full control over what gets called a pandemic. They could dictate how our doctors can respond, which drugs can and can't be used like they did this last time, or which vaccines are approved. We would end up with a one-size-fits-all approach for the entire world. A one-size-fits-all response to a health crisis doesn't even work across Canada, let alone the entire globe. As noted by the countersignal, the next question then is how the WHO and Bill Gates would be able to monitor every individual in every country to determine whether enough people are sick to justify locking down a region. To this end, the WHO has contracted German-based Deutsche Telekom subsidiary T-Systems to develop a global vaccine passport system, with plans to link every person on the planet to a QR code digital ID. Thus, there will be one pandemic treaty, one germ team, one global vaccination passport, and one World Health Organization to monitor every person on the planet. And now you know the rest of the story.
You don't want Germans to ask you for your papers constantly?
Isn't that ironic? They're going to have a German firm that's going to ask you for your papers. Here's what Dr. Robert Malone says. Dr. Robert Malone, the guy who invented the mRNA vaccine technology, which today's mRNA vaccines are built on, he says this.
This is one of those things that sounds like science fiction. It's hard to believe that the President of the United States and his administration are intentionally undermining the Constitution, but that's what it is. There has been a direct attempt with a letter on January 18th with no public awareness from the United States to the World Health Organization proposing a series of rule changes. In parallel, there was actions in Congress that will essentially allow the president to sign a treaty without congressional authorization. Furthermore, in parallel, there was action taken in the World Health Organization to breach their normal period of review and approval for countries from an 18-month period to a 6-month period. What this means is that this will get rammed through the American political system and the World Health Organization before the November midterm elections. I cannot believe this is circumstance. This is intentional. They're not only trying to bypass the Constitution and undermine it through this tortured logic that public health should take preeminence over the American Constitution, but they've put a series of hooks and political plays in place that will allow them to do this without normal review processes either by the nation states in the World Health Organization or by our own Congress. It's shocking.
So, no big deal. I was told Trump was the guy who was going to circumvent our Constitution and end our democracy. Turns out Joe Biden's doing that. So what were they really afraid of with Trump? They were afraid he wouldn't do this. That's what they were afraid of. They were afraid he wouldn't go along with them. Because he didn't come up in the Republican farm team. He didn't come up in the organization. He didn't have groomers, Trump. Trump didn't have donors for his whole life like everybody else. He was a donor. So he didn't owe favors like everybody else. They couldn't control him like they could control everybody. So what they did was they concocted Russiagate, red baited him for 4 straight years, and impeached him twice. Because he didn't have his mind right. And now look what they're doing. This is really happening. That's really happening. And they're forcing it through. They're subverting your constitutional rights. And they're giving it to a global organization that is owned by nefarious criminal pedophiles like Bill Gates. Bill Gates, how come nobody ever asked him about when he was on the plane on the Lolita Express with Jeffrey Epstein, and how many times did he go with Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, Jeffrey Epstein's dead. There's no reason to talk about it.
There's no reason to talk about it. Now, is Bill Gates for sure a pedophile? For sure he probably is.
Yeah.
For sure his wife left him probably because of that. She's intimated that that's what it was. Everybody else thinks that's what it was, which is why Bill Gates has to buy off the media, which is what we've reported on here. He's bought off worldwide media, and he's opened up journalism training centers. Well, so all the new journalists will be beholden to him. Go ahead.
He had some sex slaves who were of age.
I'm sure there were some sex slaves of age that Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein allegedly had sex with. So there you go. Those are the people that are going to be running the world. People like Bill Gates, monopolists, evil monopolists. Let's remember, you don't become the richest man in the world. As I forget who said it, but you don't make $400 million. You steal $400 million. Bill Gates is worth almost, what, $400 billion? What is he worth? $150 billion or whatever the fuck? You don't make that. You steal it, which is what he does. He stole all his ideas, and he's a monopolist. Who never finished college, but wants to be everybody's world doctor.
You remember when he was like more hated than even Elon Musk buying Twitter when they were putting pies in his face and stuff? Like,
so that's
quite a turnaround to being in charge of the world.
I think Bill Gates thinks he's a pediatrician ever since he was on Epstein's Island. I think that's what it is. Right? Epstein was a eugenicist, so is Gates, I think, right? So that's what it was. He got so used to giving anal thermometer readings on Epstein's Island, he thinks he's a pediatrician. Anyway, it's really happening. Things are worse than you think. Your government's already been taken from you. You no longer live in a democracy. Everything is a sham, and you're participating in a two-party duopoly like you actually have a choice. And they call me a nihilist. Hey, I'm on tour. Come see me in Irvine, California, Las Vegas, Indianapolis, Salt Lake City, Washington. Washington? You mean Washington State?
Yes.
Yes. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.